The year is 1896, and a 24-year-old Scotsman arrives in the thriving port of Cape Town in modern-day South Africa. James H. Sutherland arrived in Africa with much ambition, but few prospects. After working several jobs, such as overseer work and menial labor, he moved to hunt professionally in 1899. At one point in his life, Sutherland would even become a German war hero, earning an Iron Cross during his volunteer service for the German East African colonial forces in the infamous battles against the fearsome tribes of the Matumbi, Yao, and Ngido, and a plethora of others during the Maji Maji Rebellion of 1905 to 1907. Sutherland donned many professions throughout his life, but what truly defined this enigmatic man and lit a burning passion in his heart was the one thing which history would end up remembering him for: elephant hunting. Sutherland was amongst the most prolific elephant hunters in history, being active in the late 1800s and early 1900s during the golden age of the sport, when rules and regulations were doubtlessly ignored and bag limits seemed to be non existent. Sutherland is estimated to have shot between 1,300 and 1,600 elephants. But it is important to note that Sutherland only counted bull elephants, so the real number is likely larger by a considerable margin. Anyways, this is a brief and real hunting story. I apologize for the primitive illustrations, but I'm no artist. Sutherland lay completely unconscious on his bed, exhausted after a failed hunt from the evening before, until eventually the hurried steps and hushed whispers from one of his trackers awoke him with news of last night's elusive elephants. But peeking out and seeing there were still a few more hours until sunrise, he pulled his covers and snoozed once more. After all, night vision was not really a thing back in 1900, so hunting in the dark was a surefire way to end up as lion food. Eventually, the sun began to emerge in the east, and Sutherland began preparing with his men. All of them felt a deep thirst and ravenous hunger in their stomachs, since their supply runners had encountered delays from their main camp, so this hunt would be made on empty stomachs in a very dry canteen. Firstly, he sent his two personal servants to drink some water at the Mbemkuru River, while he and his two more experienced trackers, Simba and Chingondo, began on the hunt, with him vowing to head for a drink after one or two elephants were bagged, which shouldn't take long if fate showed her favor today, which she usually did for Sutherland. Through 10-foot tall grasses and thickets of vegetation, the men trekked onwards for about 3 hours under the relentless African sun as they followed the spoor, or animal tracks, in non-colonialist era hunter speech. Sutherland writes that he and his trackers would occasionally pass through where the beasts had recently fed on kwaju or wild tamarind trees. The chase continued until about 10 in the morning, much longer than any of the men had assumed it would. For hours, the merciless sun stole from them whatever precious little water was in their bodies, which soon evaporated into the hot air in an effort to cool them down. A trade with the environment I'm sure the men quickly began to find unfavorable, the longer they trudged through the dense African bush. But each moment brought them closer and closer to their quarry, and before long they could hear the elephants not far in the distance. The four men prepared themselves and moved forward carefully, nearly without making a sound. But as soon as the men thought the prize was in their hands, they became spooked, either through scent or sound, and bolted away into the brush. And just like that, hours upon hours in the hot African sun, without a drop of water or a grain of rice in their bellies, had just been squandered, as the beasts were heard galloping into the distance. It was at this point that Chingondo's spirit broke. He passed the heavy 5.77 double rifle to Sutherland before departing towards the river, saying he could go on no longer. One down, two to go. But Sutherland and Simba were made of tougher stuff. Both of them wouldn't let a small set down like this stop them, so the hunt continued. The men gritted their teeth before embarking on the beast's tracks. It seems both Sutherland and Simba assumed the elephants would stop eventually upon reaching the thicker vegetation, since it was something they'd come to expect, and he'd get some easy shots. But well, after Chingondo's departure, the chase continued for 4 more hours, and by then their thirst was killing them both, their mouths dry and the blood running thick in their veins. But both men had the hearts of lions and continued on until finally they started nearing in on the elephants, just as they had before. Their prize was just out of eyesight, but the elephants' distinct sounds were clear as day as both men made their careful approach to the thicket, even more carefully and quietly than before, so as to not spoil the hunt. They'd come all this way, and walked for hours upon hours, and soon they'd get a shot at those damn Oh, fuck. They got spooked again. To say him and Simba were absolutely crushed would definitely be putting it mildly. They both resigned themselves in defeat, and soon enough found a nearby patch of particularly soft grass beneath some shade, and decided to settle down for some much needed respite before making their way to the river for a drink. All that way, I'm sure it must have felt like heaven to finally lay down, even if they were both missing a full canteen as a cherry on top. Sutherland started to get comfortable and says he was about to take a nap when Simba offered him the Benjamin. Oh, wait, wrong year. Sorry, I meant offered Sutherland his snuff box. No, it's not a dirty joke. For those of you in the audience, for those of you in the audience who aren't centenarians or Swedish, snuff is pulverized tobacco that you apply nasally. Well, one hint from the Benjamin. Sorry, I mean one hit from the snuff had Sutherland thinking. And when I say thinking, I mean really thinking, as his brain swelled and swelled with nicotine. And then he remembered that as it gets later and later in the day, all the wild animals make their ways to the rivers and pools to get a drink. And surely the elephants must have been even more tired and thirsty than him and Simba after the hours upon hours of chase. Before long, Sutherland and Simba were tightening their belts and indulging in another pinch of snuff to freshen their jaded senses. Oh, and if you don't believe me, here's a quote before starting off on the hunt once again. According to Sutherland, as they trekked on, Simba would raise his hand to the skies and call out to God in his own native tongue. Please, God, give us these elephants. And his prayers seemed to work. With only another hour of daylight left in the sky, both men caught sight of the elephants' silhouettes in the distance. Their spirits were raised once again, and both men broke out into the fastest pace they could manage in their condition. Before long, they could hear the elephants beyond a thicket of brush, so they climbed a huge anthill to get a better view over the thorn bushes, trees, and 3 to 4 meter tall grass. He writes that this is when he noticed one elephant being markedly larger compared to the rest, with especially long tusks. I'm sure Sutherland must have felt such a magnificent beast was a reward from fate herself upon such an arduous chase. The men neared their prize with bated breaths until only about 30 yards away. Eventually, the massive creature turned its head at just the right angle for the perfect shot. A practiced squeeze of his double rifle's trigger, and a single 750 grain 5.77 caliber slug dropped it instantly. The three other elephants walked up to check on the fallen bull, seemingly concerned for their larger herd mate. Not being the type to waste a chance, Sutherland took aim again and shot another elephant with his second barrel, just behind the ear, which dropped it instantly as well. One of the two remaining elephants bolted off into the brush, as expected, whilst the other just stood there. Sutherland writes that the elephant was as if mystified by the behavior of his companions. Before the animal could comprehend what was happening or wisen up and run, Sutherland took what he calls his light rifle, which is not light at all, actually. It's a 318 Wesley Richards, and swiftly placed one bullet in its heart and another in the vertebrae of its neck. 3 down, 1 to go. With still a bit of daylight left, Sutherland decided to go big or go home, and began the hunt for the fourth elephant after grabbing his 5.77 once more and loading it with his trusty shells, consisting of 100 grains of Axite powder and a 750 grain solid shot, before heading off once again after the elephant's tracks. But their chase was cut short, and they had to double back upon hearing the trees crashing and the beast's enraged trumpeting somewhere behind them. It had doubled back, for its companions or for revenge, I cannot say. But Sutherland claims it had smelled death in the air and had gone mad. Then he sent Simba to a nearby tree to report what he saw before they made any further movements. Simba, Simba dutifully walked off into the brush, and Sutherland waited for news. A moment passed, and then another, as an eerie silence spread over the forest, as even the usual bird calls and insects chirping seemed absent. Then the peace was shattered by a huge commotion. Sutherland spotted Simba sprinting a beeline towards him with a recently infuriated elephant on his heels. Sutherland raised his double rifle and tried to take aim, but his tracker's body blocked the shot as he ran directly towards him. Sutherland called out to his companion to run diagonally, which finally gave Sutherland his chance. After one practiced squeeze, the beast was hit on the side of the head, but it seemed not to hit anything vital, as after staggering for a moment, which allowed Simba to gain some ground, he continued onwards, with an even more unquenchable fury than before. Then Sutherland let the second barrel go directly into the beast's forehead, the massive round hitting like a cannon and dropping the massive beast onto its ass momentarily, but the shot hit high and wasn't fatal, so before long it rose once more and tried to flee into the thick grass. Seemingly humbled by Sutherland's choice of ammunition, he became excited and snatched his light rifle from Simba, who just arrived by his side, panting and wheezing, before running after the wounded beast in chase. It was only moments before he caught sight of the beast and shot at it with his 318, his round impacting somewhere near the beast's heart. The beast responded to the hit from his light rifle with a series of short, shrill screams before turning to him and starting its crazed blitz. Another round from his light rifle impacted the elephant, this time directly in its face, but the 318's comparatively light bullet, and I quote, proved absolutely ineffectual, in Sutherland's words. Still, he had to stop the beast or he'd trample him to death, so he shot for the third time, directly into its forehead, hoping the light rifle would punch deep enough, but it was to no avail. When the charging beast was a mere 15 yards, Sutherland pulled the bolt back from his rifle to reveal it was empty. It was over. Facing death, and as a last act, Sutherland hurled his rifle hard at the elephant's bloody visage in desperation before leaping aside. Time seemed to stop for a long moment. Then everything came back upon hearing a deafening blast and a powerful concussion from nearby. Only a few feet away from Sutherland, and moments away from crushing him to death, the elephant swerved from the impact and continued its mad charge for another 50 yards into the jungle before coming to a stop. It tells you how powerful these animals are when Sutherland states that he, and I quote, burst through the branches as if they had been so much matchwood. Sutherland took his now loaded heavy rifle from Simba before running up to the elephant. The powerful and magnificent creature now unsteady on its feet, with the marks of battle deep in its visage as its wounds wept crimson. A powerful warrior who had fought and lost. As a side note, Sutherland has a writing style and a personality that just shines through in his writing. It practically makes him apparate beside you as he tells you his stories. I definitely recommend his reading. And if you guys don't have the money to spend on a hard copy or a Kindle copy or whatever, his book is available for free on public archives.